This exhibition in particular here is supported locally by some very generous contributions for which we're deeply grateful here at the museum. The first is from the Alturas Foundation, headquartered in San Antonio. The Mollie and Garland Lasater Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation of North Texas, Ruth Mutch, Salle Stemmons, and our local Fort Worth financial institution, Worthington National Bank. To all of these individuals and organizations, we are deeply, deeply grateful. This exhibition arises naturally out of the museum's taproot, our founder, Amon G. Carter, and his collection of paintings, sculptures, and watercolors by Frederick Remington and Charlie Russell. The Amon Carter has always retained a strong commitment to examining how artists have defined and reflected the West, not only as a place, but as, in some regards, a state of mind. Laura's exhibition that day helps to really extend that into our contemporary world. She gained her artistic bearings on one of those projects that the Amon Carter was so instrumentally involved in, which was Richard Avedon's book, ultimately called Into the American West. But that was a project that was commissioned by this institution. That's not something that everybody knows, but one of the great seminal expressions of Western culture and of the Western people of the 20th century really came out of the inception in the direction of the Amon Carter back in the late 1970s. And Laura played a key role in that work as the assistant to Richard Avedon. She played the role of setting the itineraries for him and his various forays across the West, and she played a fundamental role in helping him to locate and persuade his subjects into sitting for his camera. I think he was maybe not quite as charming as you are. But it was in those interactions that Laura found her voice as her own artist, a passionate artist who, through her lens, has captured communities and experiences that are deeply authentic and give a vision into the West that is stunning. Over the years, Laura has built a distinguished career as a features photographer, seeing her images published in such major publications and journals as the New York Times, the New Yorker, and the Washington Post. But she's also brought her vision into its own stories in several important books that she has launched out there. In 1989, there was Watt Matthews of Lamb's Head, The Hutterites of Montana in 2000, and Grit and Glory, Six-Man Football from 2003, a book that has moved me quite deeply. And perhaps like Avedon, Laura embraces the 19th century romance of the West as a place of space, big sky, and a hard-bitten temper often. A space for getting away and starting over to live the way one wants. It's a place of renewal. But she also focuses on people who live around the edges of our suburban society. And then she twists that romance, highlighting a far wider range of independent cultures than we usually see. By rejecting the melting pot romance of American assimilation, and by repeatedly seeking out and portraying strong, active women. Laura offers us scenes into stories, into the lives of the people that her lens captures. And she asks us to join her in the moment, to stand next to her in each momentary encounter. And so for this exhibition came the title, That Day. Rather than judge those who stand before us in her photographs, she asks us simply, like herself, to dignify their presence, whether we agree with their activity or not, and to accept and to acknowledge the variety of cultures that make up the West today. Please help me welcome Laura Wilson to the stage.
Well, it's very nice. Thank you all for coming here. And I hope everyone can see and hear. Thank you, Mollie Lasater, especially. I took these pictures in the West over a 35-year period. Some were taken on assignment, as Andrew said, for magazines or newspapers. Others were taken on my own. I photographed what interested me, This exhibition and book are a recollection of those interests and concerns. I'm drawn to people who live in an enclosed world, those people who live in isolated communities, isolated either by circumstance or by accomplishment. I don't mean to say, as you look through these pictures, that one way of life is better than another. It's my wish, as Eudora Welty eloquently wrote, not to point the finger in judgment, but to part the curtain, that invisible shadow that falls between people, the veil of indifference to each other's presence, each other's wonder, each other's human plight. This photograph was taken on the Y6 Ranch down in Jeff Davis County in far west Texas. As you may know if you've been in this part of Texas, around Marfa and Alpine, the Big Bend, that it's as much Mexico as it is Texas. It's the wonderful country of Tom Lee, the cruelly civilized land of Cormac McCarthy. The man on horseback on the right, Bodie Means, and his father Alf Means, right to his right. Alf Means was the great nephew of the famous Texas Ranger James B. Gillette. Gillette was born in 1856, and he said late in life, "Oh, how I wish I could describe that wonderful country as I saw it then." But this land is arid desert, and it's not going to change. There's no oil in Jeff Davis County, and the margin of profit on cattle is so slim that the Means family can barely hold on to land that it's taken them 3 generations to put together. On the plains of West Texas, coyotes have developed an acute ability to survive. They have keen vision and strong sense of smell. They're skilled, adaptable predators. They hunt deer, rabbits, rodents, snakes, carrion. The coyotes have evolved over 100,000 years. They have only one serious enemy, man. The convergence of domesticated livestock and wild has created the necessity to eliminate coyotes at various times on a ranch. And that's what has occurred here. On the Means Ranch, I photographed the women with their husbands, but the stronger portrait seemed to me to be the one of the women alone. Ranch life is almost always depicted through the eyes of the men, but the role of a ranch wife is essential. Imagine that it took for this family, it took a 120-mile round trip to get from the ranch, the Y6, to the grocery store in Alpine, and a 160-mile one-way trip to El Paso for an orthodontist appointment or a shopping mall. Debbie Means, the daughter of Ruth, the older woman in the picture, told me, "I'm saddened that we're often quite quick to assume that the traditional role of a woman does not require intelligence and resourcefulness. My mother had such perseverance. She made so many sacrifices. But we children all felt an intangible security in the home my mother created. We all felt it." Now, there's no stronger family in ranching than the Matthews-Reynolds family. And here I've photographed Watt Matthews, who was 90 years old, and his sister, he said, his old lady sister, Lucille. Watt was, when I took this picture, as I said, was 90 years old and still in charge of a ranch which covered 62 square miles in Shackelford and Throckmorton counties. Except for 4 years at Princeton, Watt had spent his entire life on the ranch, and his listing in the Princeton class directory never changed. It said, "Rancher, Box 696, Albany, Texas." Watt and Lucille was 98 in this picture, carried within them the history of the large part of the cattle industry from the time of the Civil War to the present day. Their mother was a Reynolds and their father was a Matthews. And by 1885, five Reynolds brothers and sisters had married 5 Matthews brothers and sisters. And the combined force of these 2 families pushed back the Comanche frontier along the Clear Fork of the Brazos River. When I met Lucille, she was already quite old, as Watt said, his old lady sister, and she lived in a mansion here in Fort Worth, a colonnaded mansion. And, but she frequently made the long drive out to Lamb's Head, 3-hour drive, and she'd sit in the back of her car and she'd have the man who drove her, J.D. Cloud, stop in Weatherford so she could buy black-eyed peas, and she'd sit in the back and shell the peas, so when she got to the ranch, she said, "I don't like to come to the ranch without something for Watt." Doyle Holeridge, a Texas Ranger, was standing up on the bank, a bluff of the Rio Grande. Texas Rangers and Border Patrol have worked for decades to halt the influx of illegal traffic from Brownsville and Matamoros on the Gulf of Mexico to San Diego and Tijuana on the Pacific Ocean. The border is 1,950 miles long. This is the most heavily crossed border on Earth. It's impossible to seal. Collusion, corruption, and poverty have combined to make the border country unstable. It's, as many call, an open wound. This man has swum across the river from Nuevo Leon and is running to get out of the river before being apprehended on the Texas side. Here, a drug dog in a pickup late at night. Here, under tarp, you see the dog. This is about 3 o'clock in the morning, the Border Patrol. They've stopped this flatbed truck, and the dog has found a man. You see his arm coming out from under the tarp. This border culture and the conditions on it have created a situation where the prohibited and the forbidden are its inhabitants. Border Patrol who have found these young men in the brush of South Texas. They were found by a helicopter, radioed down to the two Border Patrol agents. And they're on their way to the Border Patrol headquarters to be sent back to Mexico. By contrast, the George Washington birthday is a week-long celebration each February in Laredo, Texas. It culminates in a lavish ball held by the women of Webb County, who 75 years ago founded the Society of Martha Washington. 17 or so young women are presented in dresses which may take a year to make, cost as much as $30,000, and can weigh as much as 100 pounds. The dresses are so big and so elaborate that the girls can't get into a car or a van, and the parents hire long-distance 18-wheeler moving vans, and the girls are strapped in 3 or 4 at a time, like racehorses. And you see the young escort with his white tie in the background. The dresses are really just fantastic, and they're embellished with pearls and crystals and silk flowers and silver cord and gold sequins and tiers of ruffles and lace. But again, they're so heavy that as the girls are waiting to go on stage for the event to begin, they have to sit down. So I thought they looked like beautiful plumed birds. Again, another contrast. This, in Chihuahua, Mexico, the Hacienda de San Diego, a grand ruin under a dark, lowering sky, built in the 1860s by Luis Terrazas, the governor of Chihuahua. He was a big operator whose ranches covered more than 7 million acres. But, like Ozymandias, his political might and opulent lifestyle vanished the day that I was there, had vanished. I was driving north from Marta Ortiz and crossing into Arizona along the border there. I often look at a photograph, particularly this one, and wonder what's become of the person. How did her life unfold? This little girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, I don't remember her name, but the expression on her face, the way she stood before the camera, have stayed with me. She was one of many children, 100 or so people, living in a colonia outside of Nuevo Laredo in makeshift shacks. You can see it's a plywood shack that she is in on unclaimed land on the outskirts of Nuevo Laredo. For more than 20 years, Mexico's drug wars have scorched these colonias, scaring off people who used to come to help. Now the drug cartels enlist the children to be watchdogs, to move drugs, to facilitate kidnappings. All categories of disease, even blindness, were common in these colonias, where there was no running water, no electricity, no sewerage treatment. Dog fighting is an underground sport, which is unfortunately thriving in Texas. It's a bloody, violent battle between two animals driven to frenzy. Dog fighting is a felony here in this state with a possible 2-year jail sentence. Yet this clandestine world, as I said, is thriving. I took these pictures down in Cotulla, Texas. Aside from the dubious lure of blood sport, gambling is the main draw. The bets are anywhere from $25 to $5,000, $20,000. The vicious and illegal sport of cockfighting is, like dog fighting, also thriving in Texas and Oklahoma. These razor-sharp steel gaffs are designed to be strapped onto the rooster's legs to slice, puncture, mutilate the opposing bird. The birds often are drugged to heighten their aggression. They're tossed into an enclosure from which they cannot escape, and they fight until one of them dies. On one trip that I made up into Oklahoma to photograph at a cockfight, I had met a man in South Texas who said that I could come up and photograph him when he was taking his birds up to this place in Oklahoma. So it was up near Ardmore. And I drove up one Saturday morning, and I got there on the early side, and I saw the man, who I thought was my friend from South Texas, and we chatted a little bit, and then I wandered around. I didn't have my cameras out, and I was just looking at different things, looking at all the pickups with the cages, roosters in the back. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go into the building in which the cockfighting had started. And as I took out my camera and entered the building, I was immediately stopped. And very kind of threatening, rough behavior from the two men who stopped me. They took me to another building. They wouldn't let me leave. They went through all my equipment. They went through my wallet. They went through my handbag. They kept asking, why are you here? What are you doing? And they couldn't believe that I wasn't a reporter. But they were a bit, perhaps, maybe not widely traveled. And so when I had an actually card from the New Yorker that had my name on it, but they didn't pick up on that, which I felt very grateful for. But I was hassled and felt very, very uncomfortable for 2 hours. And then finally, the sheriff, they had called a sheriff. They wouldn't let me leave. So the sheriff finally escorted me off the property. And so each time when I went on a shoot, I usually kept some notes about what happened. And this particular day, I said, disaster trip to Oklahoma cockfight. Jim Espy, in the center, standing, and his father, Big Jim Espy, are from a pioneer family in the Davis Mountains in far west Texas. They're known as good stockmen. They, along with other ranchers in this rugged country, have a long history of hunting mountain lions. Mountain lions are solitary and hard to find, yet they prey, like coyotes, they prey, obviously, on calves, sheep, goats, horse colts, deer. The Espys use lion dogs, mixed breed hounds that are trained to track a scent 8 hours to 15 hours old in high desert country. These hounds are a rough, rowdy bunch. They're not at all like bird dogs. And they also, lion hunters, use mules rather than horses because mules have tremendous stamina. Because of their hybrids between a horse, mare, and a donkey, they have a vigor to them which allows them to be very sure-footed, and they can also recover from a hard day's ride much more quickly. A horse might take a day or two to recover, whereas a mule can recover overnight. I was talking recently, just before the publication of the book, to a lion hunter, Billy Pat McKinney, who's in the Big Bend, and he said, well, I don't know, I don't hunt them much more. He said, they're beautiful, majestic animals. I prefer to track them and preserve them now. So that's a good thought. You know you're getting close to Gallup, New Mexico, when you turn on the 660 AM radio and you hear the news and road conditions in Navajo. Bill Richardson was 90 years old, and he's here in Richardson's trading post in one of 3 big vaults packed with these great Navajo belts and necklaces and, as you can see, saddles. Bill Richardson told me, and these are his words, the Richardson brothers, my dad and his brother, come into Winslow, Arizona in 1912. Nothing to do but pick cotton back in Texas. So they come out here. They walked across the Colorado River. They learned the trading business from an uncle who'd come earlier. My dad and his brother became good traders. I was a trader kid. I played with Indians, speaking Navajo. We dug in caves, jumped in rivers. There'd be 400 to 500 Indians in an area. They'd bring in sheep, cattle on horseback using dogs. The Indians would trade for flour, baking powder, salt, sugar, canned peaches, canned tomatoes. We couldn't sell them guns or bullets. Now, today, Bill Richardson is still operating in a very vigorous way, and they take in $500,000 to $600,000 a month at this trading post. This man was one of my favorite subjects. In many years I've been photographing in the West. He was the sheriff of St. Augustine County in East Texas. He's standing with Sam and Neil Thomas, 2 brothers with whom he'd worked in various logging operations all their lives. What's unusual about Sheriff Tyndall was that he had been the sheriff for 40 years and he never carried a gun. I asked him how he held office for so long. And he said, the main reason I've been the sheriff, I had been the sheriff for 40 years is because I had the vote of every single mother in this county. When their kids got in trouble, I always treated them with respect, even when I had to put them in jail. And the second reason, he said, was because I always had good relationships with my black constituents. Tyndall had grown up on a poor tenant farm. He worked in the hardwood forests of East Texas as a mule skinner. He was elected sheriff at 21. He joined the Army or the Navy at about 17 and fought in the Pacific and was wounded. And when he came home, he rode into office as the sheriff on a wave of goodwill in the county. The town veterinarian told me he was strangely even-tempered, almost unnaturally so. He was a practical man living with poor, practical people. But even a good man can't be good at everything, not in this altogether different day and age. Tyndall was defeated for re-election when drugs became an incendiary issue in St. Augustine County. I had been sent by the New Yorker to photograph both Sheriff Tyndall and the new sheriff, but I was told by the editors that they were bitter enemies and not to tell one that I was photographing the other. But as I was there for 3 or 4 days, and I was always trying to kind of avoid the subject with both the new sheriff and the old sheriff. And the old sheriff, at the end of each day, would always call and check and say, well, how are you doing? Would you like to come over to have dinner? And I had an assistant with me, and we'd say, no, we've got to get up early. But finally, on the last day that I was there, I said, yeah, we'll come over for dinner tonight. And he had made this terrific barbecue with a great, a whole picnic table full of food, Jell-O and cornbread and all the things that someone would like from East Texas. And so I sat down on the picnic bench seat, and he sat right down next to me, and the first thing he said was, how do you like the new sheriff? And so I was trying to be, well, I didn't want to say, so I kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit, and he said, well, I'll tell you one thing. He's so dumb, he couldn't track an elephant bleeding to death in the snow. Here are two little girls on their way to First Communion in Dallas, Texas. And here, Sam Shepard. I photographed, I was invited by Sam Shepard to have lunch out at the Santa Fe Institute in Santa Fe, where 30 physicists, very distinguished physicists, mathematicians, and biologists work. Sam Shepard is there, and also Cormac McCarthy. This odd coupling of scientists and creative people, the writers, first-rate writers, are together because the man in charge of the Santa Fe Institute feels that perhaps the scientists and science itself will benefit to exposure to the creativity of these writers. And at lunch, I met Murray Gell-Mann, the famous physicist, whose most notable discovery was named for a word in James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, the quark. Sam Shepard left shortly after lunch, and he was going to Europe to work on a movie, and then he had plays that also were in production. So it was another year before I had the opportunity to return to the Institute and photograph him. And this particular day that I took this portrait, he had just completed a new play called Heartless, and he packed it in a FedEx box and sent it off to New York. And it was in production within a month. So he was in very good spirits and free for the afternoon to be photographed. He took me out to where he lives and very proudly showed off this new titanium fishing rod that he had. So it was just for me, my assistant, in the rickety chaise lounge you see there in the distance, that he did this performance with the fly rod, but not a drop of water in sight for any point on the compass, as far as the eye could see. Jim Harrison, another important American writer, writes fiction, poetry, essays about the outdoors. I went to his house in Patagonia. He spends the winter in Patagonia, and then the summer he's up in Michigan. But I went to Patagonia to photograph him. And I knocked on the door, and his wife very warmly opened the door and said, "Come in." And I heard this cranky voice in the background say, "You're 2 minutes late." And I said, no, I'm 3 minutes early. And so I think this exchange, after this exchange, we settled into a good afternoon of photography. He was quite unusual, as you can see by this photograph. He had lost, has been a longtime famously admirer of women, and although at 7 years old he lost his eyesight, his left eye, to a neighbor girl. And he was trying to find out a little bit about me and was asking me about my family, and I said that I had a sister and that she had worked for, I was thinking, well, he'll never know this, but I just was kind of yakking because I was thinking about the photograph, the portrait. And I said, well, she worked for Diana Vreeland. He said, oh, Diana Vreeland. Oh, I wrote, Jack Nicholson asked me to write some poems for her on her deathbed. And and then as we were walking through mud and wet grass in order to get to a creek where we had to stay on high ground because he had worn his bedroom slippers, he quoted W.H. Auden. And throughout the afternoon, what was alarming to me is that his intake of, double-barreled intake of alcohol and cigarettes was alarming. But he seemed completely unfazed by it, sorry. In fact, he ended the session by wanting to top off the day of wine and photography with a vodka down at the Wagon Wheel Saloon in Patagonia. Here, Jimmy Dale Gilmore, who I like this portrait very much. I think he has an amazing face. There are certain faces that move you. And so, for instance, I'm not so interested in, say, conventional handsomeness or conventional beauty, but more a face that's unusual that you perhaps don't see very often, a face that could hold a wall, which his face certainly does here. Jimmy Dale Gilmore grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and he has an old-fashioned rural tenor voice, a voice with a nasal quality that makes a perfect fit for his fusion of honky-tonk and traditional country. His lyrics are often inspired by Eastern mysticism, but the day that I went to photograph him, he'd left a simple note on the door of his small house in Bee Cave, Texas, and it said, "Hi, Laura. Sorry I couldn't reach you. I'll be back at 2 o'clock. Make yourself at home." Another very unusual person, Donald Judd. I was sent to Marfa by the London Sunday Times, and again, a person like Donald Judd who wasn't necessarily interested in being photographed. The only reason he agreed to was because he was having a large, major exhibition at Whitechapel in London. He was suspicious of me, which made him difficult to photograph, and he was ornery, which made me like him. He had first come to the Marfa area in the 1950s when he was sent on his way in the Army. He was sent on his way cross country to Los Angeles, and the bus on which he was traveling stopped in the town of Van Horn. So I said, "My gosh, what was it like in the 1950s?" And he said it was like Van Horn, the town, was so small it was like a shack thrown up around a gumball machine. I ended up liking Donald Judd very much, and I had the run of his spectacular location and photographed the concrete and milled aluminum sculpture and his collections of Native American art and European furniture. I think there are two people in my travels in the West, and I'm thinking about Texas particularly, that are very, very unusual from the people that I've met. One is Donald Judd, his vision for Marfa and for where sculpture should be seen. And if you haven't been to Marfa, you should make a direct beeline to go there because it's an amazing art center. And then the other one, of course, is Larry McMurtry, who very nicely wrote something on the jack of the book. But he had an amazing vision to assemble in the town where he grew up, in Archer City, 6 or 7, I think 7 bookstores with rare and used books. And it was just in the heyday of when he was there. It was just amazing. Like Donald Judd, a man with real vision and a wonderful example of what we can see here in Texas. Ed Ruscha, a major American artist whose breakout work dates from 1961-62, was at the top of his game when I photographed him about 5 years ago. He, too, like Donald Judd, had no need to be photographed by me, and he only agreed because a mutual friend had set it up that I could photograph him. He had the wonderful picture of him by Dennis Hopper, which you might enjoy seeing sometime. I'd arrive at Ruscha's studio every morning, and Ed Ruscha would be inside working, but I'd be met at the door by this old codger here on the right, whose name was Harvey. And every single morning he would complain to me about his working conditions. And what he was doing was he'd been hired by Ed to work on, Ed has 4 or 5 vintage cars and trucks that are in this enclosure before you enter the studio in Venice, California. And Harvey would say, it's terrible, and he doesn't pay me anything. And I'm thinking, gosh, don't be telling me this. But then when Ed came, nothing, perfectly, banter back and forth. So I guess that's how Harvey kept his job, by being cagey enough to appeal to his boss. There's a great Ed Ruscha in Fort Worth. I was just talking about this with Andrew. over at the Modern, and it's a classic. It's the gas station, the Standard Oil station, and it has that blue sky and this tremendous diagonal thrust of the gas station with a 10-cent Western being torn in half flying through the blue sky. So I think you should be sure and see that painting if you haven't already seen it. And in fact, I was saying also to Andrew that if there were just a few things that I would really, really love to own, and one would be that painting. And if you think of post-1950 American, well, art any place, but that Rouchet is just great over at the Modern, so be sure and look at it. Ed Rouchet is known for palindromes and for his witty appreciation for words and his deadpan humor. And one day when I was there, my son Owen came to visit him, and he was charmed by Ed Rouchet and by the work. And so Owen was about to leave to go to work on a movie in Europe, and so as he was leaving, Ed said, "Good luck, Owen, on your celluloid light projection." Richard Avedon, for whom I worked for 6 years for the Amon Carter Museum. I like this picture of Dick because it shows how appealing he was. He was very, very tough person, an amazing photographer, but here you see the sweet side of him. And he's pointing to a tie that had been woven, hand-woven from Chimayo, New Mexico, with the two arrows. I was told by Jake Elsey, the pilot in this picture, the fighter pilot, in Fallon, Nevada, you can kill yourself faster in a single-seat jet fighter than anywhere else on the planet. Elsey is both smart and cocky, and he possesses the classic traits of a competitive fighter pilot. He grew up in the Texas Panhandle, was the valedictorian of his high school class, and went on to the Naval Academy. Some fighter pilots are quiet, some are cocky, some are women, but all are exceptional. Highly intelligent, aggressive, quick-thinking, athletic perfectionists. I photographed them after a long day's work in the Officers Club, where I was told that this is the way fighter pilots talk, with their hands in. A little bit of horseplay carrying on later at night at the Officers Club as they're about to throw the guy into the swimming pool. Jorge Luis Borges, the great South American writer, in the Paris Review wrote, "I think nowadays, while literary men seem to have neglected their epic duties, the epic has been saved for us, strangely enough, by the Western, has been saved for the world by, of all places, Hollywood." The Western movie may be America's most important art form. From its first flicker on the silent screen in 1903 through its Technicolor heyday with John Ford, Howard Hawks, and right up to the present, the Coen brothers' True Grit, the Western has a secure place on our national soul. The key ingredient in every Western is the stunt cowboy. How else could you have runaway stagecoaches, attacking Indians, breakaway horses, charging cavalry, wrecked wagons, without the skill and daring of stunt performers? And right here in Fort Worth, every January and February, at the stock show and rodeo, you can see some great stunt riders yourselves. These women are classic trick riders. I like this picture, which shows the strength of their bodies, the condition which each of the women must keep themselves in order to perform these amazing stunts. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota bans the sale of liquor, yet it's plagued by alcohol problems. In a particularly hellish confluence of desire and commerce, the town of White Clay, Nebraska, which is 18 miles south of the border of the Pine Ridge border, has 4 stores that sells 13,000 cans of beer and malt liquor a day. White Clay has a population of 10 people, and the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation has a population of about 40,000. I went with a tribal vice chairman, Milo Yellowhair, who's driving the pickup truck, into White Clay early one morning, and it was a cold February day. As we drove slowly down the only street in White Clay, a young woman, clearly alcoholic, leaned into the cab. She begged Milo to give her husband a job. She said she had a month-old baby with fetal alcohol syndrome. She said, "I'm the drunk in the family, Milo. My husband, he's a good man. He's at home now taking care of the kids. Help him." When you're on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, you cannot help but feel a sense of desperation. 80% unemployment, 7 or 8 generations of profound poverty. Alcoholism affects 8 out of 10 families. 1 in 5 babies is born with fetal alcohol syndrome. I was sent by the Washington Post to the Pine Ridge Reservation to do a story on reservation life. And I also, at the same time, for the Washington Post, photographed Senator Ben Campbell, who was the only Native American senator. And I said, what's these terrible conditions which I saw, what's the answer? And he said, I don't know. I mean, imagine that. So, and the Washington Post wouldn't publish a number of my pictures because they said they're too hard for a family magazine on a Sunday magazine. But how else, if we don't look at these conditions, how else are we going to make attempts to improve them? Early death. Photography is against the against the rules of the Hutterites. And Hutterites are an amazing group of people on the Great Plains of the northern United States. They're far removed from mainstream America, and they live in self-contained groups of people, colonies of people. They shun the modern world. Personal freedom and financial ambition do not define them. No TV, no radios, no cars, no dancing. They're pacifists. I came away from photographing the Hutterites over a 14-year period. I went back and forth, impressed by how they've met and continue to meet the problems facing communities everywhere. Unlike the Native Americans, the reservations that I have been on, not only the Pine Ridge Reservation, but others, through hard work, through discipline, they have created for themselves a financial security. They have strong families with a sensitivity to dealing with human weakness, and they have a strong spiritual element. They're really, really unusual people. As I said, photography is against their religious beliefs. They feel it's a form of vainglory. And I had to make a number of trips to different colonies in order to take a picture. They were always welcoming, but they were watchful and guarded. Slowly, as I made friends, but I was still not allowed to take pictures. Finally, one afternoon, while visiting a colony minister and his family, I asked again, the minister, Reverend Hofer, may I take some pictures, those girls on the hay bales? And he said, no, Laura dear, how can I make you understand? When his daughter-in-law interrupted and she said, oh, for heaven's sake, Sam, let her take pictures. They're only black and white. If I were a real photographer, I'd be taking color pictures. Also, I've seen, particularly in Texas, the rise of evangelical Christianity. This is a group of people and they're called Glory Riders, and you may have seen them here in Fort Worth. I actually photographed them up in Nacona, Texas. Here, a preacher in Denver, Colorado. And the last group of pictures on six-man football on the western plains of communities in most of the western states, communities that are too sparsely populated to field 11-man teams. High schools with fewer than 100 students play six-man football. With fewer players and less congestion on the field, it's really fun to watch, and you all should, if you haven't been to a six-man game, you're lucky to be pretty close to them within a couple of hours drive, an hour and a half maybe. You can go out to Strawn, Texas and see good six-man football played. I wasn't using sophisticated equipment. I'm not a sports photographer. And when I first began photographing the six-man teams, I was kind of thinking, oh gosh, if I just had better lenses, if I had better equipment. But it ended up that the very lack of sophisticated equipment forced me to be very close to the action, to go right down on the field. And I ended up, I feel, getting photographs which showed the atmosphere of these Friday nights and also the thrill of the action. I love this picture of the young couple, and this is another, the mother following behind with her camera and her, you know, her mum's pinned to her sweater and her white sneakers. But this is another example of a picture, I think, what's become of this couple. The girl was so pretty and so excited, and so did they marry? I don't know. And the last picture, the winner, and again you see the charm of a six-man football field. There are hardly any viewers there, but it's a great thing to watch, and if you have an opportunity, you should make the opportunity to go out. Two things: go over to the Amon Carter and see that Ed Ruscha, and go out to a six-man football game in West Texas. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Anyone have any questions at all? Yes?
I read that you had changed from medium format to digital. Was that a hard change for you to make?
I was just asked that I've gone from medium format camera to digital, and was it a hard change? No, it wasn't hard at all, because I was so sick of carrying all that equipment through security and airports, and 60 rolls of film, 80 rolls of film, and having particularly the further you were from the possibility of a terrorist, for instance, Albuquerque, the tougher the security people, and every roll of film is opened and looked through, and you're scrutinized and checked. And so it's wonderful to now travel and sail right through security with a digital camera. Yes?
Do you feel like you learned anything from Richard Avedon when you were working with him in terms of your own photography? Could you describe that?
Do I feel as if I learned anything from Richard Avedon all the years I worked for him, and how it affected my own photography? Well, what happens when you work for someone, and I would think it would be true in any profession, when you work with someone who is so dominant and so strong, such a strong personality, it really affects you. And the hardest thing, not only for me, but for other people who assisted him throughout his career, is how do you get out from under that dominant influence, and how do you continue to work in your own way? And so, and I learned a lot from Dick. One great thing was one night, a young assistant who actually was the studio manager he told me ahead of time, I'm going to tell Dick tonight at dinner that I'm going to leave. I'm going to go out on my own. And I said, oof, you better be careful, because I knew how important he was to the studio. And so at dinner that night, Rudy said, Dick, I think I'm going to go out on my own, so I'll leave within 6 weeks. And Dick, who had been, very convivial and lively and chatty, slammed his drink down on the table and said, God damn it, Rudy, any fool can take a picture. Photography is about work and business, and that's what you need to learn. So you better stay with me another year. So I do think that I learned a lot from Dick, and I never learned about f-stops or shutter speeds because he didn't pay attention. I mean, he certainly paid attention. But what I learned was just what I was saying about Jimmy Dale Gilmore, the portrait of Jimmy Dale Gilmore, is to do a good portrait, you want a subject that can hold the wall. And also, I feel very strongly, you want a subject looking directly at you. You want a presence to the person. In a sense of, well, in the case of Jim Harrison, complexity and contradiction. So, any other questions? Yes. Oh, George.
Are you currently working on right now?
I'm working on 3 projects right now. One, writers, so that Sam Shepard and Jim Harrison are part of that project, where I photograph the most those writers anywhere in the world today, Mexico, Europe, who will have a lasting literary legacy. So I photographed the Nobel Prize winner, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, just before he died in Mexico City, and Seamus Heaney, the great Irish poet, Nobel Prize winner in Dublin, just before he died. And it's a wonderful project to work on. I'm also working behind the scenes on movie sets, not photographing so much the actors, but the cinematographers, the directors, all those people who work so hard to make movies that we are moved by and enjoy. And then the third project are artists at work, artists, sculptors, architects, and photographers. Yes?
Which photograph or project provided you the greatest learning experience as a photographer as you progressed in your career?
Which project has provided me the greatest learning experience? I think that I'm interested in portraits. And so anytime I'm exposed, I have the opportunity to photograph what I consider a great face. So for instance, in London in April, I was scheduled to photograph Tom Stoppard, and then he canceled, and then he rescheduled, and then he canceled, and finally, on the last day, he said, all right, I have 15 minutes. I'll give you 15 minutes. Is that going to work? And so I kind of, again, kind of hemmed and hawed and tried to wheedle out more time. No, that's it, 15 minutes or nothing. So and then where he suggested we meet was right on the street in Covent Garden. So there were it seemed like thousands of people walking by, and I felt this is going to be a disaster. I mean, I'll never get a good, where do I have him stand without people coming up to him, because he's very well known. And anyway, finally we found a spot quickly, because I knew that the clock was ticking. And he stood in front of the camera, and he has the most amazing face. It's just, so he said, as I was getting my camera ready, he said, okay, how do you want me to stand? Do you want me serious, happy, whatever? You tell me, I'll do whatever you want. And so I said, no, just just right there, and it's the most amazing expression on his face, full of, again, the complexity, the intellect, the struggle. And so in that way, I learn, no matter what projects I'm working on, it's the person's face that I have, the great face. So, sorry for the long answer. Yes?
For the Hutterites, did you show them, since they thought it wasn't color filled, so it wasn't anything special? Did you show them later? Do they know that these are in the book? Do they know these are on the walls of the gallery? How did that work? Like, do you always talk to them after?
Did I show the Hutterites the photographs that I took of them, and what did they think of them? Well, I generally don't show people the photographs, just because I'm never that far enough ahead in my work that I'm able to print and send them pictures and things. So I didn't, and with the Hutterites, I didn't show them pictures. I did have a Polaroid, which the kids just loved. And so when I was doing, for instance, the portrait of the girls on the hay bales, I would have a Polaroid and I'd take some pictures of the kids while I'm getting the girls set up on the hay bale. And the kids liked that so much that there would be what seemed like 25 kids. And I'd think, oh my gosh, no, I think I just photographed. No, you didn't photograph me. No, I think I did. And so in that way, they did see some of the pictures. But, and this I think is one of the great things about human nature. We're all vain. So when I went back to the Hutterite colony, one of the Hutterite colonies, and showed the wife of the minister her picture, which seemed to me a beautiful, serious, lovely portrait, she said, "Ah, I look so terrible." But on the whole, I think, in spite of the fact, well, another Hutterite, young Hutterite woman said to me, I've been thinking and thinking, Laura, about what you've been doing, and I've been watching you while you've been working over these years, and I've been thinking, is what you're doing right? And I think now that if you can bring attention, at least one person attending to how we live, our spiritual life, the way we are with each other, maybe that's a way to glorify our way of life. So that was a very wonderful comment. Yes?
Why did you decide to shoot Donald Judd in color rather than black?
Yeah. Why did I decide to shoot Donald Judd in color rather than black and white? Well, I was sent, as I said, by the London Sunday Times, and they wanted the whole story in color. So I was there for 4 or 5 days, and I photographed the sculpture and the interiors of his, where he lived. And of course, the interiors of the milled aluminum of those Quonset huts. And I like the color with Donald Judd because, I don't know, there's a kind of lack of color in West Texas, which I like very much. But another question about the Donald Judd, when I was saying how important I think a good portrait is that the person looks directly at the camera. Well, why do I have that picture of Donald Judd looking down? And maybe if I were just choosing one picture of Donald Judd for this story, I wouldn't necessarily choose that one. But what I liked about that is it kind of showed his sense of solitude and a bit his sullenness. So that's why he's looking down. That's why I chose the one of him looking down. Okay, Greg?
When are my daughters ready to shoot her wedding?
It's a wrap.